I was sitting in the second-to-last row of the Riverside Community Center in Guelph, trying to make myself invisible. That's not something I'm proud of. I'm 53 years old. I've raised 2 children mostly on my own, run a small alterations shop out of my garage for 11 years, and survived a divorce that nearly broke me in half. I am not by any reasonable measure the kind of woman who tries to disappear. But that afternoon, at my daughter Violet's engagement party, I felt every one of my 53 years pressing down on my chest like a stone. The hall looked beautiful, I'll give them that. White hydrangeas everywhere, Violet's favorite since she was 7, and long linen tablecloths the color of cream. Someone had strung soft Edison lights across the exposed ceiling beams, and in the late October light filtering through the windows, the whole room had a warmth to it that almost made me forget I hadn't been consulted about a single detail. Not the flowers, not the venue, not the guest list, not even the date. I found out about my own daughter's engagement party the same way I found out about most things that year. Through a Facebook post. Violet had tagged her future mother-in-law, Suzanne, in a photo of them toasting with champagne flutes. The caption read, "Planning the most magical celebration with my second mom." It had 47 likes before I even saw it. I stared at my phone for a long time that night at my kitchen table. The tea kettle had gone cold. I didn't cry. I was past crying by then. I just sat there, in the quiet of that small house that still had Violet's childhood handprints on the basement doorframe, because I could never bring myself to paint over them. And I thought, how did we get here? I should explain something about myself before I go further, because I think it matters for what happened later. I am not a difficult woman. I know that's exactly what a difficult woman would say, so let me be more specific. I don't call uninvited. I don't drop by unannounced. When Violet moved in with her boyfriend Theo 18 months ago, I helped her pack, drove 2 carloads of her things to their apartment in Hamilton, and didn't say a single word about how I felt watching her hang someone else's mother's curtains in her new bedroom window. I brought them a housewarming gift, a cast iron pan and a good olive oil, and I drove home on the 403 in the dark with the radio off and kept it all inside where I keep most things. My name is June, not the one on that list, a different June, the one nobody writes stories about, the one who shows up. Theo is a good-looking young man with a firm handshake and very straight teeth. His mother, Suzanne, is the kind of woman who wears linen in November without looking eccentric about it. She owns a real estate agency in Oakville and drives a white Range Rover and refers to herself, without irony, as a connector of people. She had apparently decided, sometime in the past year and a half, to connect herself very thoroughly to my daughter. I had nothing against Suzanne specifically. That's the honest truth. It wasn't jealousy, or not only jealousy. It was something quieter and harder to name. The feeling of watching someone absorb your child into their life so completely that you begin to wonder if your own years left any mark at all. Violet and I used to talk every Sunday. Not long calls. She was busy, I understood that, but we'd check in. She'd tell me about work. I'd tell her about whatever neighborhood drama was unfolding on my street, and we'd laugh about the same things we'd always laughed about. That had stopped around Easter. By the time summer came, I was the one initiating every single text, and by September, those texts were going 3 and 4 days without a reply. So when I arrived at the engagement party, and Suzanne greeted me at the door with a hug that lasted approximately 1 second, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and then turned immediately to embrace the next arriving guest, with a warmth that seemed to double in wattage. I found my seat in the second-to-last row, and I stayed there. I watched Violet work the room. She was radiant, genuinely radiant, in a deep green dress I'd never seen before. Her dark hair was pinned up the way she used to only wear it for school photos. Theo stood beside her with his hand on the small of her back, and every few minutes she'd tilt her head toward him and laugh at something he said. She looked happy. I held on to that. Whatever else was true, she looked happy. She found me eventually. Came over with a glass of sparkling water, not wine, just water, set it on the table in front of me and said, "Mom, you made it," with a brightness in her voice that I recognized as the voice she used when she was performing. Not lying, exactly. Performing, of course I made it, I said. Wild horses. She smiled quickly and squeezed my hand and said she had to get back, people to see, and was gone. I sat with my sparkling water and watched the room. There was a slideshow running on a screen near the front. Photos of Violet and Theo, their trips to Portugal and Banff and Prince Edward Island. Christmases with Suzanne's family that I knew nothing about. Somewhere in the middle of it there was a single photo of Violet and me. It was from 4 years ago at her university graduation. Both of us squinting in the sun. My hair was doing something unfortunate in the wind. It was on the screen for maybe 4 seconds before it moved on to a beach photo of Violet and Suzanne wearing matching sun hats. I counted backward from 10. An old trick. The woman sitting next to me was named Harriet. She was a friend of Theo's grandmother and had been brought along for company, she explained, because her own daughter lived in Vancouver and didn't visit often. We got to talking. She had warm eyes and the particular kind of directness that comes with being in your 70s and having run out of patience for small talk. She asked me how I knew the couple. I told her I was the mother of the bride-to-be. She looked at me for a moment, then looked at the front of the room where Suzanne was posing for photos with Violet, and she said, "Ah, just that. Ah," it said everything. I left before the cake was cut. I told myself it was because I had an early morning. A client coming in at 8 for a wedding dress fitting, which was true. But the honest version is that I was afraid of what my face might do. When Suzanne made the toast, I'd seen the program. She was listed as giving the toast. I was listed under special guest side. The drive back to Guelph takes 40 minutes on a good night. That night I pulled over twice. Once because I genuinely couldn't see the road. Once because I needed to sit very still and remind myself that grief and anger, worn together, will make you say things you can't take back. I had said some of those things before. After the divorce, in the hard years. I had learned, the painful way, what they cost. I did not call Violet that night. I sent a text that said, "Beautiful party. So proud of you. Sleep well." She replied at midnight with a heart emoji. I didn't sleep at all. Here's where I need to tell you about the box. 3 weeks after the engagement party, I was cleaning out my basement. It's something I do when I can't manage my thoughts. Physical labor has a way of giving them somewhere to go. I was going through the shelving unit in the back corner where I'd stored things from my marriage. Boxes I hadn't opened since my ex-husband Malcolm left a decade ago. Most of it was his. Old tax files, golf equipment, a box of cassette tapes he'd somehow never come back for. I was moving them to the curb when I found the one labeled, in my own handwriting, Violet School. Inside were report cards, drawings, a photo of her at age 4 in a Halloween costume, a bumblebee, her own idea. She'd been very particular about the antenna. And underneath all of it, a stack of paper tied with a red elastic band. Mother's Day cards. Every one she'd made from kindergarten through grade 8. Some were cotton ball sheep glued to construction paper. Some were elaborate, folded things with stickers and careful printing. One, from when she was 9, said, "My mom is my favorite person in the world because she never gives up on anything. I want to be like her when I grow up." I sat on the cold basement floor and I held that card for a long time. I didn't call Violet. I thought about it. I rehearsed the words in my head the way you do when you're trying to decide if saying something out loud will make it better or just make it real in a way you can't undo. In the end, I put the cards back in the box and I put the box on the shelf in my bedroom closet and I went upstairs and made dinner. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, was that 2 days later Violet was going to call me. Not a text, a call. At 7:30 on a Thursday morning while I was getting ready for a client. Her voice was different. Not the performing voice, not the bright and buzzy voice. Something underneath that, something that put me immediately on alert the way only a mother's nervous system can be put on alert. "Mom," she said, "can I come over this weekend?" "Of course," I said. "Violet, what's wrong?" A pause. "Nothing's wrong, I need to talk to you about something." She came on Saturday. I made her the soup she's liked since childhood, the one with the little pasta shells, and I didn't ask questions while she ate. She seemed to be working herself up to something. She kept starting sentences and then redirecting, asking me about my week, about the shop, about whether I'd heard from her Uncle Frank. I answered everything and waited. Finally, over tea, she said, "Theo and I had our first real fight." I kept my face very still. "About what?" She turned her mug in her hands. Theo, it emerged, had surprised her 2 weeks ago with a fully completed wedding budget. He'd sat her down with a spreadsheet. He'd had input from Suzanne. "Extensive input," she said, pressing her lips together. "And the plan was for a wedding next September at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake. 180 guests. Catering, open bar, a photographer Suzanne used for clients. The budget was $40,000. Theo's parents were contributing $25,000. The expectation, which had apparently been discussed between Theo and Suzanne without involving Violet, was that the remaining $15,000 would come from my daughter. Violet did not have $15,000. She was a primary school teacher in her second year. She had OSAP debt and a car payment, and she was splitting Hamilton rent with Theo and saving what she could. She had maybe $4,000 in her account. He said we could put it on the line of credit, she told me. He said Suzanne knows a financial advisor who can help us structure the debt. I took a slow breath. What did you say? I said I wasn't comfortable starting our marriage $11,000 further in debt than I already am. Her voice was very controlled. And he said his mother had been planning this for 6 months and that I should be grateful someone cared enough to put that much thought into our wedding. There it was. I watched my daughter's face. She was holding herself together the way I recognized. The particular tightness around the jaw, the brightness in the eyes that means the crying is happening on a delay. Mom, she said quietly. She had a whole binder. With vendors and menus and a color palette. She didn't. Nobody asked me what I wanted. I know, I said. And I did know. I had known it for a year and a half. Violet set down her mug. I kept thinking. There was a moment at the engagement party. I went looking for you and someone said you'd left early. And I didn't chase after you. I just let it go. She paused. I've been letting a lot of things go. I didn't say anything. I had learned that sometimes the most important thing you can offer is the space to keep talking. She's not a bad person, Violet said. Suzanne, she genuinely wants to be part of things. But I think somewhere along the way I started to manage her feelings more than I was managing my own. And it was easier to just say yes, and she was so enthusiastic, and Theo loves his mother, and I wanted him to see that I could fit in. She looked up at me. I stopped calling you on Sundays. I noticed, I said quietly, without accusation. I'm sorry, Mom. Something in my chest that had been clenched for a year and a half loosened, very slightly, like a knot worked loose from the wrong end. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. You don't need to apologize for figuring things out, I said. That's what your 30s are for. That's what all of it is for. She looked at me with those eyes that still sometimes, in a certain light, look exactly like they did when she was 9 years old in a bumblebee costume, with very particular opinions about antenna placement. What do I do about the wedding? Well, I said. What do you want? Forget the vineyard. If it were just yours, what would it look like? She thought about it for a long time. Small, she said finally. 30 people maybe, somewhere that means something. Not a venue we rented. She paused. I always thought maybe Aunt Terry's property in Elora, the backyard by the river, in June. I did not allow myself to smile too quickly. That sounds like a wedding. Theo would have to tell his mother. Yes, I said. He would. She looked at the table. She'll be hurt. She might be, I said. But Suzanne is an adult woman with a full life and a real estate agency. She will survive a changed wedding plan. The question is whether you and Theo can build the habit, right at the beginning, of making your own decisions. Violet was quiet for a moment. You've been sitting on that for a while. About 14 months, I said. She laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that starts in the belly. It sounded like Sunday phone calls. What happened next unfolded over a few weeks. And I will tell it to you honestly, including the parts that weren't easy. Theo and Violet had a harder conversation than the first one. He pushed back. He felt it would embarrass his mother, felt it would look like an insult after everything she'd contributed. Violet stood her ground in a way that I heard about secondhand, and that made me privately proud in the way you're not supposed to say out loud. She told him she wanted a marriage that they built together, and that meant the wedding had to be theirs first. Suzanne was, from what Violet told me, not gracious about it initially. She called Violet twice in one day. She sent a long text to Theo about feeling excluded, about how much she'd invested, about how she only wanted what was best for them. There was a period of about a week where things were genuinely tense. But Violet held the line. Theo, to his credit, held it with her, and I stayed out of it completely. I did not call Suzanne. I did not send a pointed text. I made absolutely no move that could be interpreted as orchestrating anything. Because it wasn't my battle to fight, And because I understood, maybe better now than I ever had, that the worst thing I could do was make Violet feel like she'd traded one suffocating set of expectations for another. I just answered my phone when she called. I just showed up when she needed me to show up. 3 weeks before the wedding, Violet called me on a Sunday morning. She was at the kitchen table, she said, with coffee, and she just wanted to talk. We were on the phone for an hour and 15 minutes. We talked about the seating arrangement and the food, yes, but we also talked about nothing. About a book she was reading, about a student in her class who had started drawing the most remarkable pictures, about whether I thought the shop could ever go fully online. The old rhythm of it, easy and unhurried. Before we hung up, she said, "Mom, I want you to give the toast." I had to put my hand over the receiver for a moment. "Are you sure?" I managed. "You're my mom," she said. "You've always been my mom. I should have been better at showing you that." The wedding was on a Saturday in late June, at my sister Terry's property in Elora, in the backyard that runs down to the Grand River. 31 people, white chairs on the grass, wildflowers from a farm down the road, arranged by Violet's best friend in jam jars along the aisle. The dinner was roast chicken and new potatoes and a green salad that my sister made in the biggest bowl she owned. The cake was lemon, Violet's favorite since she was 7. Like the hydrangeas, except this time someone had asked. Suzanne came. She sat in the third row with Theo's father, and she was dressed beautifully as she always was. And at one point during the ceremony I looked over and she was crying in the honest, unguarded way that people cry when they're moved against their will. I felt something toward her in that moment that I hadn't expected. Not warmth, exactly, but understanding. She found me afterward, near the drink table. She had a glass of white wine and a cautious expression. "You did a good job with her," Suzanne said. It cost her something to say it. I could hear that. "She did most of it herself," I said. And I meant it. We didn't become friends. I don't expect we ever will. But we shook hands, and it was a real handshake, and that felt like enough. I gave my toast just before dessert, when the evening light was turning the river gold. I had written notes, but I didn't use them. I looked at my daughter in her simple cream dress, sitting beside the young man who loved her, and I said what was true. I said, "I was not always the easiest person to have as a mother," I said. "I have made mistakes I wish I could take back, and I have been quiet when I should have spoken, and I have spoken when I should have been quiet," I said. "Watching you become someone who knows what she wants and fights for it, gently and without drama, has been the great privilege of my life." I said, "I hope you argue sometimes. I hope you choose each other every day, even when it's inconvenient." And then I said, "To my daughter Violet, who still has her handprints on my basement doorframe and always will." She was already crying before I finished. So was Theo. So was Harriet, who I had invited, and who had come from Guelph, with a gift-wrapped lacracy pot and a card that said, "For the girl with the good mother." I didn't know she'd written that. I didn't read it until later that night, after everyone had gone, sitting on Terry's porch in the dark with a last glass of wine and the sound of the Grand River, moving somewhere below us in the trees. I have thought a lot since then, about what it means to hold on and what it means to let go. I held on to those Mother's Day cards for almost a decade without knowing why. I let go of the engagement party without saying what I felt, and I let go of the Sunday calls without fighting for them, and for a long time I thought those were failures. That I had been too quiet, too careful, too easily pushed to the second to last row. But Violet didn't come back to me because I fought for her. She came back because I was still there, unchanged, in the same house with the same soup and the same patience, when she was finally ready to find her way home. That's not a small thing. After all these years I finally understand that staying, really staying, without conditions and without keeping score, is its own kind of strength. My phone rings on Sunday mornings now. I let it ring twice before I answer, just so she doesn't know I'm already holding it.